Welcome everybody. My name is Ashley Pearson and I am in a master's program in applied nutrition and dietetics at Union Institute and University. Today we are going to be talking about basic nutrition 101. And before we jump right in, I want to say a disclaimer that I am a dietetics student. Okay, and so because of that, please do not use this information in replace of the medical information that you would receive from your provider or nutritional information that you would receive from a registered dietitian. That is my goal. Right now I am a student and I wanted to share with you guys information for this class, and our class is called Basic Nutrition 101. So let's jump in, let's get started. So why is this important? Why is learning about basic nutrition important? Many of us may have learned nutrition from different sources, such as social media or learning things on the internet and just doing the plain Google search. Maybe some of us have had a basic nutrition course already in school, or have just had an interest based on their own symptoms or own things that have been going on in their body. And so many of us have different backgrounds of how we have grabbed a hold of different nutrition information, but it's always important before we can dive into the deep and very much of the time, the very interesting things in nutrition and different concepts. Before we can get there, we have to go back to basics. We have to lay a foundation. We have to learn what are the basic principles of nutrition before we can build from there and actually learn even more interesting concepts and complex concepts in nutrition. Also, I wanted to take a side note and say, please grab a pencil, grab some paper, anything that stands out to you, please take note of it. It's important to, as we're learning, to utilize that reflection piece of writing things down. And that way, when you look at it later, you can even do some more research about a certain topic or a certain need, because maybe you think or feel like you may need something more in your diet. And so if you're looking for a nutrition course or video on all the details of micronutrients and minerals and vitamins and phytochemicals and all these different things that are very interesting, and this video is not for you. And so this is a basic nutrition course. Like I said, we're gonna lay the foundation out for us today so that we can learn more about what the basic principles of nutrition entail, and that will allow us to build from there. So the first thing that we're going to talk about today is macronutrients. And what are they? So that comes from a word, macro and nutrients. And macro means large or a lot of something. And nutrients are substances that the body needs to perform its bodily functions. And so that word together, macronutrients, means that there are certain substances that we need in large quantities to perform our bodily functions. So macronutrients do a few things. They provide energy to the body. They help to provide structure and help regulate chemical processes in the body. And so today we're going to talk about 4 different macronutrients that we need to consume on a daily basis and need to consume a lot of. And the first one is not so intuitive and may not be addressed as much as part of the main 4 macronutrients that are needed, but it's so vital that we get this macronutrient. It's something that doesn't actually provide any energy whatsoever, but we need a lot of it. And I'm wondering if you are already thinking in your mind already what it could be. And so I'll tell you that it is water. Water is the first macronutrient that I'm going to talk about today. We need it in such large quantities. It's such a vital source of way for our body to process different things, to move and transport different nutrients into our body and through the bloodstream. And so water is so important. So according to the Food and Nutrition Board, it's recommended that women consume about 2.7 2.7 liters per day of water. And for men, it's much higher. Men, they recommend for them to consume about 3.7 liters of water. And so it's so important to get that amount of water into our body so we can keep hydrated, so we can keep everything flowing, including when we go to the bathroom. It's important to drink enough water so we reduce the chances of getting constipation or even things like that. And so, of course, the exact quantities that may be specific to you may be different. It may not look like the exact 2.7 liters if you're a woman. It all depends on your weight. It depends on your physical activity. There is a myth that I want to debunk. Coffee, as we may have heard or learned, that it does a counteractive effect because it's caffeinated and it makes us go pee, but actually that's a myth. They have found in research that when drinking coffee compared to water, it does not increase urinary output. And because of that, you can include coffee or other beverages like tea into the amount of water that you're drinking. And so you can add that to your total fluid intake for the day, which is great if you're coffee drinkers, but if you're not, you don't need to worry about it. But the total water intake is for the total fluid intake that you consume on a day-to-day basis. So the function of water is threefold. It's to transport nutrients throughout the body. It's to help eliminate waste, as I said, and reduce the chances of constipation. And also for number 3, it helps to regulate body temperature. So once we get dehydrated, if we don't have enough water in our body, then it could even expedite that process. And so it's important for us to keep hydrated, to keep consuming the daily recommended intake for each individual. And if you have questions, of course, about anything specific to you in this class, I definitely would recommend you seeing a registered dietitian so that you can work with them individually and find out what your exact needs are. The remaining 3 macronutrients are carbon-based compounds that allow the body to process them and break them up to usable energy. And that's so important. And you're probably already thinking of some that you already are aware of. The first one that we're going to talk about is protein. Proteins are macromolecules that contain amino acids, and amino acids are the basic unit of life. And even in the Greek, the word protein actually meant primary importance. And so that's such a great even word that they came up with way back in the day, because it really showed how much we need protein to perform our bodily functions, our basic functions for life. Some of the functions of proteins in the body are to provide structure to muscles, skin, and even bones. And so they also act as catalysts. They act as catalysts or hormones to regulate different chemical processes in the body. And if you have taken a chemistry class or a biology class, you may know that many chemical reactions in our body are highly regulated, highly specific. And so proteins are what help to allow these processes to continue and to really function adequately and almost like to perfection, because our body really works very specific. And that's partly because of the proteins that help them do that. The primary function of proteins are tissue and organ repair, and also the production of hormones and enzymes. Those are the main things that proteins do in the body. So the amount of energy that protein provides is 4 kilocalories per gram of protein. And so if you see a nutrition label, then you can actually see how much calories, how much energy you're getting from that protein that you're consuming. And so again, Protein's main function is not to provide energy, it's to help with tissue and organ formation, and other production of hormones and catalysts. And that makes sense because if you think about someone who is pregnant, a pregnant woman, they need so much more protein because their bodies are building and developing a human being in their own womb, and so they need so much more protein to be able to build all those tissues and connect all those bones and different things like that together. Some food sources that you may be well aware of that provides protein are meats, dairy, plant-based proteins such as peas, millet, whole grains, legumes like beans, chickpeas, peanuts, and other nuts or seed oils. All of these different food groups really help to provide protein to our diet. And even vegetables. Vegetables can contain protein in some amounts as well, that can help with our overall protein intake for the day. And according to the Food and Nutrition Board, they recommend a daily amount of between 0.8 and 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And I know some metrics go into pounds, especially where I live. And so you have to do that conversion from pounds to kilograms. But that's the number that they recommend. Most people actually would benefit from more depending if they're weight training. And so again, these recommendations will vary from person to person. And so you can take it as face value that's the recommendation between 0.8 and 1.2 kilograms of protein per kilogram of body mass. But you can also, if you're really interested in knowing exactly how much to consume, you can talk with a dietitian, especially or even a sports nutritionist and a sports dietitian if you are looking to we're looking to have more gains or things like that. Collagen makes up roughly 6% of our body weight, and in addition to that, it also makes up 30% of bone tissues, and it also makes up parts of tendons, ligaments, cartilage, skin, and also muscle. Collagen is known as a strong and fibrous protein. So let's take a look a little bit more into collagen. So collagen helps makes bones strong and flexible, and it also helps with the skin. And collagen fibers in the skin also helps with the same thing. It helps make skin more flexible and also strong, and even the ability for you to pinch your skin and let it go back into place. That is the job of collagen and another protein called elastin. Of course, if you are dehydrated, then you might see a different response when you pinch your skin. It won't jump back into its normal position as it would if you were fully hydrated. So that's a little indicator if you maybe are on the verge of dehydration. Keratin is another protein that helps with making your skin, hair, and nails very strong. It's also a fibrous protein. And I know we briefly talked about enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that increase the rate of reaction for a lot of the chemical processes in the body, and they are much needed. Enzymes are very specific, and so they will only respond and allow a specific substrate to bind to their active site. And this is very similar to how a lock will only respond to a specific key. There's one key that fits one lock, just like there's one substrate that fits one enzyme. And because of that specificity, enzymes are wonderful ways for the body to regulate systems. So another function of proteins is hormone synthesis. And hormones are produced by the endocrine glands in the body. Insulin is a type of hormone that is made up of proteins. So when hormones are released, they are transported into the blood and through the blood to the target cell or the target destination. An example of this is when you consume your food or your big meal, and after that your sugar levels or your glucose levels in your bloodstream increase. And what that does, it causes the pancreas, which is an endocrine organ, to release insulin. And once insulin is released, then it will tell the body to take up the glucose from the bloodstream, and then that way it can be transported into the cell to either be made into energy or for the building of other macromolecules. The next macronutrient that we're going to talk about today are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates contain a carbon, a hydrogen, and an oxygen molecule within each compound, and they come in different categories. So what we're going to talk about today is the simple carbohydrates and the complex carbohydrates, and that can get confusing, but how I will define it is that simple sugars have one or two basic sugar units that are linked together, and when they break down after consumption, they give you a quick burst of energy. And so this is something like table sugar or candy. They will give you a quick burst of energy and allow you to feel that sugar rush, as you can say. But complex carbs are different. Complex carbohydrates have more complex and branched units in their structure, and because of that, they will take some time to break down, and so the energy is a little bit more sustained in that sense. Some example of complex carbohydrates that have long chains of sugar are fiber-rich fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and even beans. Beans, they also have long chains of carbohydrates. The amount of energy that carbohydrates provide us is 4 kilocalories per kilogram of body weight. And so you can also, again, look at the nutrition label and look at to see how many carbohydrates that is provided within that food. And then after that, if you multiply it by the conversion factor, 4 kilocalories per gram, you can actually see how much calories you're obtaining just for that product. The primary function of carbohydrates is, as you may know, to provide energy for our bodies. We need carbohydrates for energy. Carbohydrates also provide different structural components for cells to form and to be made. And so that is why that most oftentimes you'll see that we need a lot more carbohydrates with the fruits and the veggies and even grains, whole grains, than even sometimes protein, depending on, of course, all those individual factors, the weight, your goals, and your age. But generally speaking, we need a lot more carbohydrates so that we can obtain that energy. So we can find carbohydrates in some of these following food sources, like dairy or grains, fruits, and starchy vegetables. And so I wanted to highlight this because I think often when we think of carbs, we think of pasta, we think of bread, we think of all these very, very high carb foods, especially if you're in the diet world or have watched your carbs before. Those are the big main ones that we can even at times overconsume. And so I wanted to highlight that there are actually other carbohydrates that are beneficial, like the starchy vegetables, like potatoes or sweet potatoes. Those are high carb vegetables, or butternut squash, that will allow us to not just obtain a complex carbohydrate, but it also help us to gain different nutrients that may not be found in some of the refined carbohydrates or refined grains. like different breads and such. And let's dive deeper into the details of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates supply energy to all cells in the body, and even some cells prefer glucose over other energy macronutrients. Like red blood cells, for example. Red blood cells only will utilize glucose as their form of energy. It will not utilize fats, for example. When the body consumes excess glucose, it's then stored in the body in the form of glycogen. And it's mainly stored in the liver and in the muscle organs. So fun fact about glycogen, it can contain about 50,000 glucose units within only one glycogen molecule. And this is very packed with energy. So if someone's running, for example, a 10K marathon or working out for a few hours, then the glycogen stores in their body, in their muscle tissues, in their liver, they can go depleted. And oftentimes this looks like severe fatigue. It could look like a decrease in exercise performance. So what happens if we are not able to consume the amount of glucose that is needed to make energy in the body? Well, that means that the body will have to find some sort of solution, and oftentimes it will use amino acids to make glucose. And because of that, the body will identify proteins and that can be broken down, and that way they can turn their protein structure back into amino acids, which is the building block of proteins, and change the amino acids into glucose so that the body can use it as energy. So what happens when we eat too many carbohydrates? And remember, carbohydrates are sugars. So though there may not be very strong scientific evidence that brings a correlation between weight gain and increased amount of refined carbs, and refined carbs are carbs like white rice, white bread, white pasta, pastries, those are refined carbs, cookies, those are refined carbs, things like that. Though there's not yet a definitive correlation, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but just for right now, with what the research does tell us and share is that there's not quite a strong correlation between the two. But what has been found is that there is a strong correlation between the amount of added sugars that someone consumes with weight gain, and also with an increased disease risk. And so the additive sugars are definitely something that we want to avoid or stay away from. Additive sugars comes in the form of simple syrup. It comes in the form of high fructose corn syrup, or added brown sugar, white sugar, honey. Any of these things are added sugar. Sugar that comes from an apple or a banana or an actual whole food is not considered added sugar. What also has been found is that there are a lot of research study that shows that there is a correlation between an increase in consuming unrefined grains with a decrease in obesity, a decrease in other disease risk, and also an increase in ability to lose weight as well. So it's definitely important to consume more of the unrefined carbs versus the refined carbs. Unrefined carbs look like the whole grains, brown rice, whole wheat pasta, quinoa, millet. These types of unrefined carbs contain even much more micronutrients, which we haven't really talked about today, but they're much more nutritious for you compared with refined carbs, like all the white pastas and white rice and white breads. The next macronutrient that we're going to talk about today are fats. And fats, similarly to carbohydrates, contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in their macromolecule. However, they're structurally different from carbohydrates because they are insoluble in water, meaning they won't dissolve. If you ever added oil to water, you know that they don't mix, that you'll continue to see a separation just because they're structurally different chemically. And so we're gonna talk about just some of the functions of fats. Provide 9 kilocalories per gram of fat that is in the food product. And so they provide the most energy out of all of the macronutrients. We saw that for protein and carbohydrates both, they provide 4 kilocalories of energy per gram of food. And so it's very notable to see that most of our energy comes from fat. Some of the primary functions for fats in the body is to provide stored energy for the body. They function as signaling molecules in different chemical reactions. They also make up the structural components of many different structures in the cells. Even the cellular membranes are made up of fats, one fat called phospholipids. And there are 3 different types of fats that we consume and need to consume on a daily basis. There's triglycerides, there are phospholipids, and there's also sterols. So all of these fats are needed in some quantity for our bodily function. So fats provide insulation to the body and help maintain body temperature. It's recommended that we intake about 25 to 30% of our calories be in fat. And so if we are needing about a 2,000 calorie diet, around there, that means that 25 to 30% of those calories should come from fat. Some of the food sources where we can find fat are butter, oils, dairy products, nuts, seeds, and processed foods, which may be one of the first things you think about when you think about fat. I think it's good to know also that there are some foods that contain more than one macronutrient, and that can give us multiple sources of foods that we really need in our day-to-day. So let's take a look at some of them. Here I have a picture of a dairy product, cheese and yogurt. So here I have a picture of some dairy products. I have cheese and I have yogurt. Which macronutrients can we find in both of these food items? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about it. So if you guessed carbohydrates, protein, and fat, you are correct. There are protein, we can find protein, we can find fats, and we can find carbohydrates in all of these food items here, in the yogurt and in the cheese. And so it's important to look at that even when you're consuming your food, to take note and to think, oh, okay, what is this food giving me? Which macronutrient that my body needs is this food going to help me with? And so it's interesting and even a fun kind of experience to look at even when you're grocery shopping. Okay, well this is a piece of cheese that I'm going to purchase. I know I'm going to get some good fat. I'm probably going to get some protein and also carbohydrates within that. So keeping note of where we find these macronutrients in different food sources can help us to be mindful even of how much we're consuming. Okay, another food group I'm going to bring up are nuts. Okay, so we have nuts here. Which macronutrient can we find, or macronutrients can we find in nuts? If you guessed protein and fats, then you are correct. Nuts provide a good amount of healthy fat and protein as well for our bodies. They do have a little bit of carbohydrates in them, but it's not it's not a large amount, and so because of that, they mainly provide protein and fat. All right, the next food item I'm going to bring up are avocados. Avocados are delicious. They're great with salads. They're great on top of meats as well. And when you look at avocados, what do you think about? Which macronutrient do they mostly provide? All right, if you thought that they provide a lot of fat and fiber, then you're correct. So Avocados contain a lot of good, healthy, unsaturated fats. They also contain a good amount of fiber. Some can contain up to 3.5 grams of fiber, which is a lot compared to the daily recommended amount of fiber that we need per day. According to the Food and Nutrition Board, males often need about 38 grams of fiber if they're between the ages of 31 and 50. And if you are a female between the age of 19 and 30, then you will need roughly 25 grams of fiber a day. And that can be a lot. And so it's good to know which foods are my high fiber foods. And that way you can take a look at consuming those more and purchasing those more at the grocery store so you can get your daily recommended amount. All right, so those are the 4 main macronutrients that we need to consume daily. And I want you to notice that we didn't even touch on micronutrients. Micronutrients are also essential substances that we need to consume. They come in the form of minerals and vitamins. We're not going to get fully into that now, but I wanted to share that with you, that there's so much more even at a basic level that we can learn about nutrition. So where can we find fats in the body? Fats are often stored in adipose tissue. Adipose tissue is another way of saying fat tissue. And when we consume excess energy or excess calories or excess fat, it's often stored in adipose tissue. So fun fact about fat cells, they can store fat almost indefinitely, meaning the more excess fat that is consumed, the more excess energy and calories that we consume, they can be stored into fat cells almost indefinitely. And because the fat cells are able to expand and grow as much as it needs. Unfortunately, as you all may well know, when we consume excess fat, that does put a lot of stress and of course weight on the body and can lead to detrimental health effects. Additionally, excess of a specific kind of fat is linked to a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. Cholesterol, when consumed in excess, can build up on arterial walls and block blood flow and lead to cardiovascular disease. And so cholesterol, though it is a type of fat, it's the fat under the umbrella of the sterols. The sterols is a type of fat that's abundant in the body. Because cholesterol is needed in the bloodstream, it's often placed in the membranes of cells, and it actually helps to allow fluidity in the plasma membrane. And so we do need some cholesterol, but the excess of it can really build up on arterial walls and cause problems. So most of the energy that is used in the body come in the form of either carbohydrates or fats or lipids. And the main difference between these two, the main difference between glycogen, which are glucose sugars branched together, stored as energy, or the fat molecule, the biggest difference between these two is how readily it can be used. So fats are packed tightly together without the presence of water, and because of that, you can pack so much more of the fatty acids or lipids into a smaller space compared with glycogen. Glycogen is packed with water, and also it's branched, meaning that it takes up much more space. And so the ability for us to break down glycogen happens at a quicker manner versus fats. So glycogen breaks down much more readily than fats. Here are a few interesting facts about fat. A benefit of fat is that they help to insulate us and protect us. So about 30% of our weight is in fat. And we already talked about how adipose tissue or fat tissue is the place where fats are stored. But there's also another type of fat called visceral fat. And visceral fat is a type of fat that goes around the lining of our organs. And so you think of Organs like the heart or the kidney or the liver, they're always surrounded by some fat, and that is to help protect them, help to keep them insulated, because those are vital organs in our body. And of course, when we consume abundance of fat in our diet, the visceral fat can increase. And when that happens, it can become very dangerous for our organs. It's meant to be a protective layer, but not to be a huge burden on our organs. The physical presentation of consuming too much fat and having an excess of visceral fat lining our organs are beer bellies, or AKA, I guess, the beer gut. And so when that happens, it does increase risk for disease, and it's important to reverse the amount of fat on our organs by controlling the amount of fat intake in our diet and choosing different foods. Again, fat is still needed in our body, and one organ that loves fat and is actually made up of majority of fat is the brain. The brain is made up of 60% fat. It also serves an important structural role for the brain. Fats also increase the bioavailability of compounds like phytochemicals. Phytochemicals are those that are said to have higher health benefits and can improve well-being in our bodies. The phytochemicals such as lycopene found in tomatoes or beta-carotene found in carrots, they often need fats to help increase their bioavailability in our bloodstream. Bioavailability is something that may not be discussed often, but it's very important to take a look at. Basically, what it means is that when something is introduced into your body, into your bloodstream, maybe not all of it is actually used to perform its active function. And so the amount that it's used, if it's more bioavailable, then more of the substance that is actually consumed will be used for its active function. And so for example, the phytochemicals, it needs fats in order to have an increase in bioavailability. Otherwise, we might just eliminate most of it out. Triglycerides are a type of fat that function in the body to regulate our internal body temperature. If for some reason you're not able to consume enough triglycerides in your diet, then oftentimes you could be feeling a lot more cooler, maybe feeling more tired or colder, and fatty acid deficiency, and again, triglycerides are made up of fatty acid. So when someone has fatty acid deficiency, it can lead to even pressure sores on the skin. Fatty acids can either be saturated or unsaturated. The biggest difference between that is the presence of a double bond between two carbon atoms. If there are double bonds within the chemical structure of a fatty acid, it's considered to be unsaturated. There are different degrees or amounts of unsaturation that we can characterize fatty acids, and the presence of this double bond causes a difference in characteristic for either unsaturated or saturated fatty acids. For example, olive oil is a liquid at room temperature, and most liquids at room temperature, if they're fats, are unsaturated fats because they contain a double bond. Now, if you are looking at more of animal-based oils or butters, such as tallow or regular butter, grass-fed butter. Those food items are solid at temperature, and they contain a lot more saturated fat. Saturated fat can come from places like chocolate or butter again, or other meats as well. So let's do a little recap today. In order for this to have any impact in your life, I want to take some time to take a look at the different food sources that we can find these macronutrients, so that you can take something with you today and continue to write notes, continue to write down things that are interesting to you or that really highlighted to you. that will help you even in your journey and learning more about your own personal nutrition experience. So again, with proteins, we find proteins in meat, seafood, beans, almonds, dairy, vegetables, other legumes, and other nuts as well, such as cashew nuts, peanuts, all these different types of nuts or even legumes. Legumes, you have chickpeas, lentils, beans, and even soybeans, different things like that. And so you can find your proteins in those food sources. And the interesting thing is that protein deficiency isn't quite common in America. We have an ample amount of protein-rich foods that most people, not everyone, but most people have the opportunity to consume. The majority of people that suffer from protein deficiency are children in poorer countries. And what can happen if they don't consume adequate amount of protein, say for example, if they don't consume enough protein and they're low on a protein in their body called albumin, then they will begin to swell. And so that's how you can see even some pictures in different foreign countries where they have limbs that are just swelling or abdomens that are just swelling because they lack a protein or lack enough of a protein in their body. So here we're going to talk about different examples of carbohydrates that you can consume on a daily basis. We have different examples of whole grains like brown rice, quinoa, millet, barley, whole grain, even bread. These are different types of carbohydrates that you can consume. And in addition to the grain section, you also have vegetables. And so you can eat fruit, fiber-rich fruits such as pears, apples, mangoes, even blackberries and raspberries have a lot of fiber in them, and they are very delicious for you as well. Some examples of fiber-rich vegetables are broccoli, cauliflower, turnip, greens and peas, even different fruits, different vegetables like that, and also Brussels sprouts. I also wanted to say this side note, fruits and vegetables are filled with micronutrients. They're filled with vitamins and minerals that our body truly does need to perform its basic functions day to day. And so it's a great idea to make sure you increase even some of your vegetable intake or fruit intake so that you can have adequate amount of these types of carbs in your diet. So when people consume less carbs, the most obvious and notable response is for people to lose weight. And so that is often what you see with different diets, like the keto diet, the paleo diet, or different diets like that where carbs are reduced. However, there are and have been some preliminary studies even that showed that the long-term side effects of a much lower than recommended intake of carbs could possibly have certain side effects, especially in women. And so it's important to make sure you are getting what your body needs and that whatever works best for you. And of course, if you are looking to talk more about your specific individual needs, I definitely would recommend that you see a registered dietitian nutritionist so that they can walk you through that process. All right, and so the next one, to review our fats. So let's review some of the food sources that we already discussed. Some of the foods that some of the foods that are high in fat are butter, nuts, seeds, processed foods, and dairy products that are a good source of fat in our diet. And also, like we learned, avocados are a good source of fat in our diet as well. There are three main types of fats. Again, they're triglycerides, phospholipids, and sterols. And it's good to note that not all fat is created equal. It's important to know that it's recommended to avoid all trans fats. Our body simply doesn't need to consume it. We don't need an additive amount of trans fat to our bodies whatsoever. And trans fats are those that we find a lot in processed foods or even packaged foods, packaged packaged desserts, those types of things. And according to Harvard School of Public Health, they have found that trans fats are associated with a higher risk of coronary artery disease. And so it's best to avoid trans fats altogether. But if you cannot for some reason, it's best to try to eliminate as much as you can for the betterment of your health. One thing we have to think about is to consider the source. With fats, it's important to look and identify where are the foods that we're eating come from. If they're coming from real whole foods like avocados, those kinds of fat, that's a good fat. If they're coming from nuts or seeds, those contain good fats. But if they're coming from something that's heavily processed, going to McDonald's or going to fast food restaurants or eating packaged food items or chips, those things that we have to consider the source and see that those fats are not as healthy as others. And so it's best to reduce the amount of saturated fat, but also to avoid completely trans fats in our diet. All the information that I shared today comes from peer-reviewed scholarly literature. The majority of the information is from a textbook called Human Nutrition, and you can actually find that online for free. So if you're interested in learning more about the topics we covered today and also more topics on basic nutrition, please see the link below in the description and you'll be able to learn more about basic nutrition. If you're interested in tracking your macronutrient intake and would like to use an app, I would recommend the app Chronometer. The link is in the description below. That way you can get a gauge for how much macronutrients you're consuming. If you need more, if you feel like you need less. There are other apps out there that are great if you're physically active. If you would like individualized care, I would recommend you see a dietitian. That way you can understand what your personal needs are. Before we end for today, let's test your knowledge. I have some questions that are going to pop up on the screen and you can take your time with them. They're going to stay on for about a minute or so, and then at the end you'll be able to see all the answers so you can see how much you learned from today. And feel free to type your answers in the comments below so that other people can also see what you're thinking. watching this entire video. I had so much fun talking with you guys today. Please like, subscribe, and comment down below anything that you had learned or are interested in learning more of. I am so excited to be on this nutrition journey as a dietetic student with you all. Bye.